Caught in the crossfire. Slightly longer one today. Paul eventually made it to Rome. But first, according to the account of Acts, in 57 AD, he returned to Jerusalem and, surprise, surprise, became embroiled in a riot. Admittedly not of his own making. Well, not just of his own making. Arrested by the Romans, he appealed as a Roman citizen to have his case heard by the emperor. After 2 years in a Caesarean jail cell, he was eventually put on a ship and sent to Rome. After an eventful voyage, storm, shipwreck, no duty-free, he arrived in Rome in the spring of 60. And that's where Acts ends. We don't know of his fate for sure, but later tradition, strong tradition, has it that both Paul and Peter were executed in Rome. And the man ultimately responsible for their fate was the Emperor Nero. In 64, a fire broke out in Rome. It spread rapidly, destroying homes and buildings and burning for 5.5 days. Of the 14 districts of Rome, 3 were completely destroyed, and only 4 escaped some kind of destruction. There was widespread looting, and gangs were even reported as preventing people from fighting the flames. This led to conspiracy theories and ugly rumours. There were claims that someone I knew had seen people actually setting light to buildings. No, really, they were clearly acting under orders. It was all a government conspiracy, man. And for government, read Nero. The myth that Nero fiddled while Rome burns is wrong, and not only because the violin hadn't been invented. The first stringed instruments played with a bow originated at least 6 centuries later in Mongolia. Just a free bonus fact for you there. But Nero was deeply unpopular because of his conspicuous wealth and scandalous lifestyle. He had, after all, killed his own mother, allegedly. Oh, right, almost definitely. Rumours spread like, well, wildfire, that the blaze was started on his orders to clear the way for a new city to be built named after himself. So Nero did what leaders always do in such circumstances. He found someone else to pin the blame on. He found the Christians. The Roman historian Tacitus recorded that an immense multitude of Christians was convicted, not so much on the charge of arson as because of hatred of the human race. Beside being put to death, they were made to serve as objects of amusement. They were clad in the hides of beasts and torn to death by dogs. Others were crucified, others set on fire, to serve to illuminate the night when daylight failed. The main accusation against the Christians was based on their hatred of the rest of the human race. They were burned and savaged and crucified because they were different. An immense multitude, and among them probably, was Peter, the uber apostle. We don't know when he had arrived at Rome. In fact, we can't be certain he was in Rome at all. But there is a famous story, the Quo Vadis legend, where Peter is urged by his fellow Christians to flee from Rome. On his way out of the city, he sees the figure of Jesus walking in the opposite direction. Quo vadis? Peter asks, which is Latin for, where are you going? Jesus, who surprisingly turns out to speak Latin, replies that he is going into Rome to be crucified again. So Peter turns around and follows his master to his death. It's a famous story and has made for a couple of extremely ropey Hollywood films. But the story comes from a thoroughly unreliable source called The Acts of Peter, which was written sometime like between 180 and 225. The book is more like Harry Potter than Simon Peter. There's a running battle between the apostle and a character called Simon Magus, which features, among other things, a talking dog and the amazing resurrection of a herring. At the end of it, Simon tries to fly and gets quite a long way up before the prayers of Peter bring him crashing down to earth, breaking his leg in 3 places. Not sober history, then. However, the story of Peter's death in Rome probably does have a strong historical basis. There were shrines to him and to Paul in the city from very early on, indicating that Paul too was executed, although whether as part of this persecution or later, we don't know. Although a later tradition has Paul leaving the city after his trial and going to Spain, there's no real evidence that he ever left the city. According to the legends, he was beheaded. Footnote, according to later legends, his head bounced 3 times, and at each bounce a fountain sprouted up, which is why the traditional site of his death is called Tre Fontane. There is a church there now. Presumably, if we were able to measure the distance between the fountains, we could work out just how strong the executioner was. Just a thought. In AD 67, just to compound his sins, Nero introduced the organ to Rome. There were public organ playing competitions. The organ was played in the arenas too, so at least Paul was spared listening to that. The persecution in Rome shattered the church in the city. Those who could escape did. Those who couldn't kept their heads down. Evidence of their suppression comes in the fact that we hear nothing more from the church at Rome for another 50 years or so. Things weren't much better in Jerusalem. Rising nationalism, combined with the actions of a series of completely inept Roman officials, meant that the situation in Judea was getting more and more tense. And in 62, during a power vacuum when the province was between Roman governors, the high priest took a cheap shot to get his revenge. The high priest's name was Ananus, and his father, Ananus, or Annas, had judged Jesus. His brother-in-law was Caiaphas, and he was the man who had engineered the execution of Jesus. An old vendetta. So, while the Romans were looking the other way, Ananus Jr. took the opportunity to kill, according to Josephus, a man named Jacob, the brother of Jesus, who was called the Christ, and certain others. He accused them of having acted illegally and delivered them up to be stoned. It was a deeply unpopular move, and the incoming Roman procurator Albinus saw that Ananus was removed from his post. Ananus died at the hands of his own people, assassinated by a group of Jewish assassins, the Zealots, in 68. But by that time, he was no longer the high priest, but commander-in-chief. He was leading the Jewish rebels, because by that time, Judea was in revolt. And we'll get to the Judean revolt tomorrow. But in the meantime, there's a little pen picture of Peter. So here we go. Peter from the 3rd century medallion. Apparently, fine head of hair for a man of his age. What do you think? You decide. Name Cephas, a.k.a. Simon or Peter, or Simon Peter. Nationality Galilean Jew. Dates died circa 65. Appearance not known. Traditionally quite a big bloke. Before he was famous, fisherman, disciple. He's famous for following Jesus. Not following Jesus. Following Jesus again. Leading the church in the first few months after the resurrection. Why does he matter? He is the uber disciple. The heart and soul of early Christianity. Passionate, determined, occasionally wrong-headed. Jesus said he was the rock on which the church would be built, although people have argued for years about what exactly that means. And could you have a drink with him down the pub? Yes, but he might want to sit at a different table to you, depending on how Jewish he was feeling at the time. See you tomorrow.